So the book has a cool map in near the back that shows the maps of Paul's missionary journeys. It has a cool little mnemonic to help you remember the order of the journeys. So I meant to bring it because I'm a very visual learner, and it's kind of cool to see that, and it kind of helps paint the picture of what we're talking about, but I didn't bring it.
Where is the mnemonic?
It's on the
Map itself?
It's on the map. There's like 4 maps for the 3 journeys, and then his journey to Rome is the 4th map. I'm trying to picture it. And then down at the bottom,
City names.
yeah, it shows the city names, the route. It's just kind of interesting to look at. And then there's a mnemonic at the bottom that helps you kind of remember the order of his missionary. Yeah, it's very cool. It's very cool.
We did have a couple of good maps.
Yeah, good. Okay, so you may have seen something similar. Fantastic. Yes, I mean, star pupil here, fully prepared with.
So I've got the second one and the third one, I think.
Okay.
But I don't have the fourth because we're just down there.
Well, check it out. The 4th,
Okay.
I think, is the one to Rome, which we haven't quite gotten to yet. That'll sneak peek. That comes next week. Tonight, I'm going to speed up a little bit, but we are going to look at Acts 25 and 26. If you all are up for it, we're going to do a little reading together, a little role playing almost. There's a few characters, so if you guys have Bibles and are willing to, I'm going to assign some parts. When we get to Acts 26, we're going to start with 25. And I'm really excited to be teaching this. I am really happy to be here. I'm sad that I've missed the other classes. I watched Olga's class online last week. And I went through some of them. I've been traveling and have had a busy few weeks, but I'm really glad to be here, and it was a lot of fun to dig into a lot of the details on these 2 chapters in Acts. It's pretty cool. Okay, we're going to break it up into 5 sections. So Acts 25 and 26, we're going to go through it in kind of 5 different parts. Olga can help me with the background here because she taught last week. But just kind of as a refresher in terms of where we are. Paul's been imprisoned. We're kind of following Paul's trial or his trial process. That's kind of the part of the big story that we're in right now. He's been imprisoned as a result of a riot that erupted in Jerusalem. The Romans have sent him to Caesarea. That's where we are as we start chapter 25. We're in Caesarea, and that's where Paul is being held. And when we ended last week, maybe Olga remembers, who was the kind of the head guy?
Well,
Felix.
had retired.
Yes.
And
he was being
by Festus.
Very good. That is where we're going to pick up. So what I'm going to do as we go through this, if I remember, and y'all yell out, I'm just going to make a list of kind of the characters we encounter in these 2 chapters. So the first character is Paul. So we know we're going to hear from Paul. And we just talked about another character, Festus. Yeah, I'm going to try. How about that's better? So we have Paul. And then we're going to pick up with Festus, right? Okay, so for the first part, I'm going to read Acts 25, 1 to 12. And I'm going to try to read this pretty quickly. Okay? This is Paul's trial before Festus, Acts 25, 1 through 12. 3 days after arriving in the province, Festus went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and the Jewish leaders appeared before him and presented the charges against Paul. They requested Festus, as a favor to them, to have Paul transferred to Jerusalem, for they were preparing an ambush to kill him along the way. Festus answered, "Paul is being held at Caesarea, and I myself am going there soon. Let some of your leaders come with me, and if the man has done anything wrong, they can press charges against him there." After spending 8 or 10 days with them, Festus went down to Caesarea. The next day he convened the court and ordered that Paul be brought before him. When Paul came in, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him. They brought many serious charges against him. but they could not prove them. Then Paul made his defense. I have done nothing wrong against the Jewish law or against the temple or against Caesar. Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on these charges? Paul answered, I am now standing before Caesar's court, where I ought to be tried. I have not done any wrong to the Jews, as you yourself know very well. If, however, I am guilty of doing anything deserving death, I do not refuse to die. But if the charges brought against me by these Jews are not true, no one has the right to hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar. That's going to be important. After Festus had conferred with his council, he declared, you have appealed to Caesar you will go. Okay, so that's kind of the first section that we're going to focus on. So that's essentially, that's Paul's trial before Festus. And what is his, how would you characterize his tone? Defensive. Was it aggressive? Was it, did it sound like he was, yelling or being aggressive towards the people in the court, or did it sound a little more kind of cool, calm, and collected?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like he knew his rights.
Like he knew his rights. Like he was pretty confident, I would argue. He seems pretty confident here, and that's going to be a theme we're going to see. We're going to see him repeat his story and essentially be on trial a few more times here. But kind of pay attention a bit to the tone that he's taking. If you zoom out a little bit from this scene, a guy on trial in front of a judge, let's say, a Christian, defending his faith, does that make you think of anything today? Can you imagine that scenario happening today, either to us or to someone in the world? Is this something that might still happen? Yeah? Persecution of Christians, or not even full-on persecution, but even just being in front of civil authorities as Christians, we're still being maybe put on trial, maybe not for our beliefs, but I don't think it's too hard to imagine this type of scenario even for us today. As a Christian, living in the world, living under rulers or authorities in the world, being challenged by those authorities. Is that hard to imagine, or you can kind of picture that? Yeah. There's a little bit of back and forth here about kind of where they are, right? So Paul is in Caesarea, Festus is in Caesarea, but he goes to Jerusalem, and there's an attempt by the Jews to get him to be moved to Jerusalem. And this is where Paul says, when Festus says, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial? This is in verse 10. Paul says, I am now standing before Caesar's court, where I ought to be tried. I mean, he basically says, I'm good here. I don't need to go to Jerusalem. If you remember in chapter 24, it was when there was a scene where his nephew alerts him to a plot to ambush him. So he's already, you can imagine, he's kind of like, not really going to risk that again. I'm here, we're in court, you're here. Why don't we kind of just do this thing here? But I think it's important to notice, and we'll see this as we keep going through this, that he's defensive in the sense that he's defending himself, right? But picture a confident, picture a kind of a tone of confidence, and see if that picture works as we go through these two chapters. As we talk about this, we're going to read the text. then we're going to just talk about it a little, not just what happened, but maybe interpreting a bit and then applying it. And the application here could be kind of our submission to worldly authority. I'll read you a short verse from Romans, also from Paul. This is Romans chapter 13, verses 1 and 2. Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. So an encouragement from Paul, writing to the Romans, about submitting to authority. So there's a little bit of kind of an application there that I think we can all relate to a little bit. That makes sense so far? So far we've seen Paul on trial in front of Festus, right? Okay. Let's look at the second section is now starting in verse 13 through 22, which I'll also read. So this is Acts 25, verses 13 to 22. A few days later, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to pay their respects to Festus. Since they were spending many days there, Festus discussed Paul's case with the king. He said, "There's a man here whom Felix left as a prisoner." Felix was the guy before Festus. "When I went to Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews brought charges against him and asked that he be condemned. I told them that it is not the Roman custom to hand over anyone before they have faced their accusers and have had an opportunity to defend themselves against the charges. When they came here with me, I did not delay the case, but convened the court the next day and ordered the man to be brought in." So he's kind of saying, I jumped right on this. I didn't wait. Felix before him had kind of a 2-year period where he didn't do anything. Festus kind of jumped right in. When his accusers got up to speak, they did not charge him with any of the crimes I had expected. Instead, they had some points of dispute with him about their own religion and about a dead man named Jesus, who Paul claimed was alive. I was at a loss how to investigate such matters, so I asked if he would be willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial there, but when Paul made his appeal to be held over for the emperor's decision, I ordered him held until I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, "I would like to hear this man myself." "Tomorrow you will hear him," he replied. So this is basically Agrippa comes on the scene, so new character, Agrippa, and someone else. Who's the other person with Agrippa? Bernice.
Is that his wife?
Great question. I'm glad you asked. Who asked? I'm glad you asked. I hope you're ready for the answer. We'll get there in just a second.
Okay.
So this whole passage is basically a recap of Festus and Agrippa kind of getting up to speed on what's happened. So Festus is telling Agrippa, "I'm glad you're here. Thanks for coming. We've given him a trial. I tried to get him to Jerusalem. He didn't want to go." Who are Agrippa and Bernice? Agrippa is known. This is going to get messy real quick, so I'm going to throw a bunch of things at you. You look like you want to say something.
No, I'm picturing in my mind the family chart of Herod.
Yes.
Herod.
Yes, we're in the lineage of Herod, of King Herod. So Agrippa is Herod Agrippa II. So the grandson of King Herod. These are not nice people. This is the notes that I have here. This is a corrupt political dynasty family. I think that's kind of a modern way of thinking of this. So
That's putting it mild.
that's being very diplomatic, right? Yes, it's putting it mildly. I mean, I'm going to rapid fire, and I'm going to get to your question about, was it his wife? Great-grandfather was Herod the Great. We know Herod the Great from the birth of Jesus. Herod ordered all the babies to be killed when Jesus was born. That's his great-grandfather. His great-uncle was Herod Archelaus. Herod Archelaus is talked about in Matthew 2. Joseph was afraid to stay in Judea because of the reign of Herod Archelaus, so not a great record for him. Another great uncle, Herod Antipas, and this is so messy that we don't even want to get into it. Lots of strange family relationships going on there, let's just say. He beheaded John the Baptist. So these guys are pretty notorious, right? These guys are kind of maybe public enemy number one, this dynasty in this time. Agrippa's father was Herod Agrippa I. We learn about him in Acts 12. The first part of this course covered the first part of Acts. He killed the apostle James and tried to kill Peter. So Herod Agrippa II, King Agrippa, who's come on the scene, is coming from a lineage of people who are messy and have attacked Jesus and the apostles. And Bernice is his sister and probably his wife. So that's a little messy. Talk about putting it politely, my notes say this was not your typical brother-sister relationship. So,
I like what I said, she married her uncle, but then became a mistress to her brother.
yeah,
And then after that, a mistress to Titus also.
right. I mean, what I gave you was like the 20,000-foot level. If you have a study Bible, you'll see a lot of these details in the notes. If you look up some sources here, I mean, that was the quick and high-level version of all of this stuff. There's a bunch of other details here. But the point in this section is we've now got kind of authorities. This is the king and his sister wife, kind of. But a kind of corruption enters the scene. Still Paul is imprisoned and still under the rule of King Agrippa. We're about to see, we're about to hear more about that, but just kind of note that they've come on the scene, but not nice people here. Okay, that was kind of the second section. King Agrippa is introduced. The third section I'm going to read real quickly, which is the rest of chapter 25. And this is really just Paul beginning his trial, if you will, before King Agrippa. It's going to start to sound a little repetitive, and it probably even sounds repetitive from the last few chapters, because what we're hearing Paul being put on trial, essentially repeating his defense to both the Roman governor and the king of the Jews. So he's submitting to these authorities in these chapters. So last few verses, starting with verse 23 of chapter 25. The next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp and entered the audience room with the high-ranking military officers and the prominent men of the city. At the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. Festus said, "King Agrippa, and all who are present with us, you see this man, the whole Jewish community has petitioned me about him in Jerusalem and here in Caesarea, shouting that he ought not to live any longer." Does this sound a little familiar? What does this sound a lot like? Jesus under Pontius Pilate. Verse 25, I found he had done nothing deserving of death, but because he made his appeal to the emperor, I decided to send him to Rome. But I have nothing definite to write to his majesty about him. Therefore I have brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that as a result of this investigation I may have something to write. For I think it is unreasonable to send a prisoner on to Rome without specifying the charges against him. So Festus here, who's kind of heard from Paul already, is filling Agrippa in and saying, look, we've talked to this guy. I don't see anything. He has appealed to Rome. I will honor that appeal, but I don't even know what to tell the Roman authorities. I don't know what note to send to Caesar and say what he's done wrong. I don't see anything that he's done wrong. Does it feel like almost like washing his hands of this, trying to, yeah, right? Okay, so that kind of closes out chapter 25. So we've seen Paul on trial with Festus. We've seen King Agrippa and Bernice enter the scene, and we've seen Festus bring them up to speed. So everyone's kind of up to speed. So what's left now is for Agrippa to ask Paul, fill me in, like, what's your side of the story? Tell me what happened. Yeah? Are you guys up for some reading together?
We have a different.
You have a different, that's okay.
We probably should not read because it's different.
No problem. Does any,
What version?
I'm in the NIV.
Oh, okay. That's easy.
We forgot to bring our.
That's no problem. That's no problem. I'll just keep reading. I'll do the reading for us. But now we're going to move into chapter 26, and we're going to talk about this in two different parts. Okay. We're going to talk. I'm going to read verse 1 through 23 first, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then the last part is going to be verses 24 to 32. This section, though, chapter 26, verses 1 to 23, this is kind of the crux of what we're going to be thinking about tonight. So maybe it's better to just kind of listen and absorb this. This is Paul speaking to Agrippa, mostly Paul speaking to Agrippa, talking about his defense, and his defense is to tell the story of his own conversion. This is the third time in Acts that we've heard Paul's conversion story. No, you didn't do 22. That might have been Tom. Acts 22, we heard of Paul tells his conversion story. And in Acts 9, Paul tells his conversion story. So this is the third time that the reader of Scripture hears this. There's some new information here, and I'll point it out as we go through it. Okay? So I'm going to read chapter 26, verses 1 to 23. I'm going to go a little slower on this. Then Agrippa said to Paul, "You have permission to speak for yourself." So Paul motioned with his hand and began his defense. "King Agrippa, I consider myself fortunate to stand before you today as I make my defense against all the accusations of the Jews, and especially so because you are well acquainted with all the Jewish customs and controversies. Therefore, I beg you, listen to me patiently. The Jewish people all know the way I have lived ever since I was a child, from the beginning of my life in my own country and also in Jerusalem. They have known me for a long time and can testify, if they are willing, that I conformed to the strictest sect of our religion, living as a Pharisee. And now it is because of my hope in what God has promised our ancestors that I am on trial today." That's an important, I'm going to read that verse again. That's verse 6. It is because of my hope in what God has promised our ancestors that I am on trial today. God's promises to the Jewish ancestors would be a reference to what?
Jesus.
Yeah, and specifically probably the Old Testament, that Jews of the day would be very familiar with the Old Testament. So he's saying, I was a Pharisee, I know the Bible, I know our scriptures, I know what we now call the Old Testament. Okay, this verse 7, this is the promise our 12 tribes are hoping to see fulfilled as they earnestly serve God day and night. King Agrippa, it is because of this hope that these Jews are accusing me. Why should any of you consider it incredible that God raises the dead? He's saying, what's so surprising here? Haven't we been reading about this? Don't we know the scripture? Haven't we studied this? Verse 9, I too was convinced that I ought to do all that was possible to oppose the name of Jesus of Nazareth, and that is just what I did in Jerusalem. On the authority of the chief priest, I put many of the Lord's people in prison, and when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. Many a time I went from one synagogue to another to have them punished, and I tried to force them to blaspheme. I was so obsessed with persecuting them that I even hunted them down in foreign cities. So Paul is talking about what? His life before his conversion, right? Verse 12, on one of these journeys I was going to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priests. About noon, King Agrippa, as I was on the road, I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun. Okay, we're about to hear some details of his conversion, or we're about to hear him convey the actual conversion experience. And there's some interesting stuff in here. Already, I want you to listen for a theme in the next 10 verses or so of light and dark. Just listen for references that make you think of light and dark. We've already heard one. We're in verse 13. About noon, as I was on the road, I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, blazing around me and my companions. We all fell to the ground, and I heard a voice saying to me in Aramaic, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. Then Paul asked, who are you, Lord? I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting, the Lord replied. Now get up and stand on your feet. I have appeared to you to appoint you as a servant and as a witness of what you have seen and will see of me. I will rescue you from your own people and from the Gentiles. I am sending you to them to open their eyes and turn them from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan to God, so that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. I'm going to just read that one. I'm going to read verse 17 and 18 again. This is Jesus speaking to Saul before he becomes Paul. I will rescue you from your own people and from the Gentiles. I am sending you to them to open their eyes and turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, so that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. We're going to come back to that in a minute. I'm going to finish this off real quick in verse 19. So then, King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the vision from heaven, first to those in Damascus, then to those in Jerusalem and in all Judea, and then to the Gentiles. I preached that they should repent and turn to God and demonstrate their repentance by their deeds. That is why some Jews seized me in the temple courts and tried to kill me. But God has helped me to this very day. So I stand here and testify to small and great alike. We're going to come back to that also. I am saying nothing beyond what the prophets and Moses said would happen, another reference to Scripture, that the Messiah would suffer and, as the first to rise from the dead, would bring the message of light to his own people and to the Gentiles. Okay, that was 26, 1 through 23. So we already talked about that being the third version, or the third telling from Paul of his conversion story, all three in Acts. There's kind of at least two things that we hear a little bit more about here. We hear in verse 10, he says, he's talking about persecuting Christians, and he says, when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. Your study notes may point this out. That might have been a reference to him being part of the Sanhedrin. So it's a detail about his past that we learn about here for the first time. And then the second thing is we learn more about what Jesus said, the vision he had, the words he heard from Jesus during his conversion. And that's where we saw the theme of light and darkness. I want to stick on that theme for a second. Can you think of other examples in the Bible where light or dark or the contrast between them comes up?
Transfiguration.
Okay. Transfiguration.
Creation.
Creation. Sep- Ascension. What is it? What do you think it? What does it mean to you? What do you think What do you think of when you think of moving from the darkness to the light?
The psalmist said, "Your word lights my path."
Okay, that's good.
Presence of the Lord.
Okay, the presence of the Lord. And Paul says that in verse 18. He says, moving from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God. Jesus is telling Paul what his mission is, what his role is here, to open their eyes and turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God. If there's one thing to remember from tonight, it would be chapter 26, verse 18. Paul's mission, if you will. And Paul recounts it as part of his conversion story in front of King Agrippa. We talked when Paul was talking to Festus, we talked about kind of his tone. What's his tone now? Has it changed? Does he sound angry? Does he sound like how does he sound to you? Does it sound pretty similar to when he was talking to Festus? It sounds kind of matter of fact. He's recounting his story. This is the truth. And he says that a number of times. I'm telling you the truth. There's no evidence that he's yelling. There's no disruption. He's certainly not challenging the authorities. He's there. I mean, he's kind of on the second round of this same trial. He's like, some new guy has come in, and I already told the first guy my story, but you want to hear it? I'll tell you the story again. He's not challenging the fact that he's even there. He stood his ground when when they wanted to move him to Jerusalem. We see this picture of Paul of an obedient servant, I would say, who is confident in front of the authorities. And what is he confident about?
His innocence.
His innocence, telling the truth. What is ultimately his faith, his story? He's confident about his belief in what he saw. What is that? Is there a takeaway for us there? Is that an encouragement? I mean, we are probably unlikely to be on trial in front of some corrupt king. At least, I hope none of us are in that situation. But are there situations where we're faced with difficulty in being confident and asserting our faith? I mean, every day in front of the driver on I-10 that cuts you off, or the person making your coffee at Starbucks that put oat milk instead of whatever other kind of milk I mean, are we always confident and at the same time humble about our faith and about sharing it? I'm not. It's hard to do that. It's hard to do that under the best of circumstances. And this is not the best of circumstances by any means. Paul is in prison. We know where this story is headed. We'll find out in the next 2 weeks. Paul is headed to Rome. We kind of know how this part of the big story ends. He may not know that yet, but he's cool, calm, and collected, and is as confident as he ever has been of what he saw and what he experienced. And he's essentially witnessing Agrippa's in the room, Bernice is in the room, Festus is in the room.
Are they listening?
They're listening. He's answering Agrippa's question. Agrippa said, what's going on? Tell me. They're listening. So he's not only keeping his cool under a pressurized situation, but he's speaking confidently about his faith. He's witnessing to his literal oppressor. It's not even just the guy that cut you off on I-10. I mean the way worse than that. And he's using that opportunity to tell them about Jesus.
That's the one thing that has struck me so much in this part of Acts that we've been doing this part of the year, is that he's always willing to give his testimony. Whether it's the full-on, this is how it happened, or this is what I believe, or something like that. And
That's a great takeaway for basically all of Acts, or at least the second half probably. That's really good.
So it's powerful, and they haven't interrupted him. He's gone on this long.
He hasn't been interrupted.
So they are listening.
that was
Right.
because usually they cut him off.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. And in fact, that's a good segue. Actually, I want to read you a few other things before we go on to the next. Where did I get up to? 23, right? Okay, we'll finish it off in a minute. I want to read you a few other points about this idea of light and dark. I'm going to read you 6 verses, most of them written by Paul, that talk about light and dark. The first one is Romans 1:21. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. 2 Corinthians 4:4. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. These are all essentially parts of Paul's writings to various churches that he's, in a sense, recounting what Jesus told him in this vision, and is taking that imagery of darkness and light, using some of the same words, and using it to instruct the churches that he writes to in much of the rest of what we would consider the New Testament. The third one is in 2 Corinthians 6. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers, for what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness, or what fellowship has light with darkness? Ephesians 4:18. They are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to their hardness of heart. So darkness is being used over and over again to symbolize what? Unbelief, hardness of heart, unwillingness to hear or to open up to the message. Colossians 1:13, he has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son. And then the last one is 1 Peter. You might recognize this one. 1 Peter 2:9. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellence of him who called you out of darkness and into the light, into his marvelous light. So 6 examples from Paul's writing on this theme of darkness and light. Okay, let me finish off in the last section here. We just have a few verses left to read in Acts. So we are on verse 24. So this is now after Paul has told his conversion story to Agrippa. Agrippa's listened, presumably Bernice. Everyone has listened to this story. Verse 24. At this point, Festus interrupted Paul's defense. You are out of your mind, Paul, he shouted. Your great learning is driving you insane. So Festus seems kind of upset at this story. Paul wasn't shouting. Paul wasn't yelling. Paul is telling the truth calmly and confidently. Festus is pretty bothered by this. Your great learning is driving you insane. Verse 25, I am not insane, most excellent Festus. I mean, if someone yells at you and says you're crazy, and your response is, most excellent friend, I'm not crazy. I mean, this guy's pretty good at keeping his cool right here, yeah? Keeping his witness. I am not insane, most excellent Festus, Paul replied. What I am saying is true and reasonable. The king is familiar with these things, and I can speak freely to him. I am convinced that none of this has escaped his notice, because it was not done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you do. I mean, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Then Agrippa said to Paul, and this is, you can kind of picture this. Agrippa says to Paul, do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian? I mean, even asking that question reveals a bit of what he's thinking, right? Right? He's thinking, this guy's trying to convert me. I'm the king. He's on trial. I can do probably whatever I want here. And he's witnessing to me. And so, to me, I think that is so revealing. Do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian? Paul replied, short time or long, I pray to God that not only you, but all who are listening to me today may become what I am, except for these chains. I mean, that pretty much says it all right there. The king rose, and with him the governor and Bernice and those sitting with them. After they left the room, they began saying to one another, this man is not doing anything that deserves death or imprisonment. Agrippa said to Festus, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar.
Isn't it funny that the only one in chains was really free, and all the others were not?
The only one in chains was really, that's great. That's why she's a great teacher. That's good. The only one in chains was the one that was truly free. That's a mic drop moment right there. That's great. We know that's the end of chapter 26. So chapter 27 and I think 28 is the last chapter. So the next 2 weeks we're gonna close out Acts, and it will be about Paul's journey to Rome. So this is kind of the end of his trial in Caesarea with Festus and Agrippa and Bernice hanging on there. Let's just kind of summarize. So Paul's behavior throughout these 2 chapters, his tone. Let's recap that. What was it? What's his tone? Confident, cool.
I'm cool, collected, it made a lot of sense.
There you go. Made a lot of sense.
Thinking as they hear him, other than to say we have no right to be.
I mean, what do you think? What do you think they're thinking? I mean, I think that's a great question, and I think that I think is why it's so interesting in verse 28, where Agrippa says, do you think you can persuade me to be a Christian? I think that means he's thinking about it.
Gosh, this great event you can't believe is going to happen in your lifetime.
Yeah.
And it is.
Yeah. So his behavior, cool, calm, and collected, confident, doesn't get rattled. What are the actions that we see Paul take here? Now, he's in prison, he's in chains, so he's not running around the countryside, but what actions, what do we see him doing? He's
still witnessing.
He's witnessing. He's witnessing. He's witnessing
To these people.
to his oppressors,
Yeah.
right? And what would you say on this idea of light and dark, and thinking of Jesus' words to Paul, and then we looked at Paul's words to us, the church, in Paul's letters. What is that? What can we take from that today? What mission, if you will, does that convey to us?
That if we were in that situation, that we could stay as calm, cool, and collected as he did.
Yeah.
He believed what he was saying.
He believed what he was saying. And Jesus tells him, remember verse 17 and 18, Jesus says to Saul, I will rescue you from your own people and from the Gentiles. I am sending you to them. Picture Jesus saying this to us. Put yourself in Paul's shoes here. I am sending you to them to open their eyes, turn them from darkness to light, and turn them from the power of Satan to God. That's a pretty good mission statement, if you will, for us as Christians in the world today. I am sending you to open their eyes. I am sending you to turn them from lightness to dark. And we do that the way Paul did it here, by being confident, staying cool under pressure, and witnessing to others, even when it's hard to do. And that's not easy to do. I don't do it well. Maybe you guys do, but it's a difficult thing to do, right? It's hard to do. I sit in an office all day surrounded by professionals working on computers, and I'm not preaching the gospel to them. So normal, regular, everyday circumstances, it's a lot harder to do than it feels like, right?
But you know what? You are preaching to them every day by the way you live. And it's either you're living in light or you're living in darkness.
That's great.
And
That's
so
great.
and that's true with all of us.
Yeah.
We either
Yeah.
one or the other.
You set an example.
You're setting an
Maybe
example.
some of those people who are not leading your kind of life.
What's I'm going to probably butcher the phrase, but witness always, use words when necessary, something like that. Yeah?
You know, one of the things that I think is interesting here is when Paul mentioned Christ, that Christ would suffer and die. That's the moment when Festus interrupted him and said, "You're crazy."
Ah.
So he was okay listening for a little while.
He was getting under Festus's skin. Agrippa seems to have maybe stayed a little more even-keeled, but Agrippa was thinking. But yeah, that's the point where Festus was maybe like, I've had enough. Okay, I hope that was a good, helpful walkthrough of these two chapters in Acts. I hope it helps.
Wait for next week.
Great. Well, next week is going to be great. I think Heather is teaching next week, and it's on Acts 27. So if you're going to be here, probably a good idea to read Acts 27. Would somebody pray us out?
Then you will.
Lord, we've come before you tonight to listen to your word, how strong your word is, how much confidence you gave to Paul. We heard him say it. Help us emulate that same type of language when we're called upon. Watch over this class in the weeks to come and bless our facilitators, instructors, and pastors. In your son's strong name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you for taking time away from your family.
Well, you're welcome.
I know you have to get up very early.